Always makes me want to Irish dance. I'll have to come on here some week doing a wee jig.
You can dance if you want. There's nothing stopping you dancing.
Dance around my kitchen. Why not? Evening, everyone.
Evening, everyone. Lauren, will you turn down your volume again? I'm getting a bit of feedback there. Sorry.
Certainly will.
Welcome, everybody, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to the Shebeen. It's Sunday night. I'm Barry, and that's Lauren, and maybe on my left or right, depending on whether you're upside down or sitting up straight or whatever way you're looking at the screen. How are you getting on, Lauren?
I am doing the very best. Thank you very much. Yes, I have a wee Donville's 21-year Palo Cortado in my glass tonight. I'm seeing loads of people are bringing out the JJ Corey, very fitting to our theme tonight, which is great. Very
fancy. I've got a drop of Gold Spot because this is a celebration of 135 years of whiskey bonding for the Mitchell family, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So it's actually months since I opened this. It's one of those bottles where, do you ever get that when you take a bottle off the shelf that you hadn't opened in months and it just it almost feels like it's ready to explode a little bit. There's a little bit of extra oomph behind the cork.
You need to wet the cork. Make sure you don't end up with any damaged corks. I always do that. Just give it a wee flip upside down and we're good to go.
Wherever you're joining us from, you're all very welcome. We've got folks from Long Beach, New York. We've got Las Vegas. We've got Phoenix, Arizona, Gilbert, Arizona, Milford, North Dakota. David's got a drop of Cliffs of Moher Palo Cortado. We'll be talking about that whiskey later, won't we?
Good man, David.
Stacey's joining us with a drop of 2 Stacks Polaris. 2 Stacks, of course, a whiskey bonder themselves. We are going to talk about bonders, boats, and buckets of whiskey responsibly tonight. We're going to dive into the interesting world of whiskey bonding, the confusing world of whiskey bonding. We're going to reveal some new Irish whiskey experiences, Lauren, aren't we?
We are indeed. That's maybe where the buckets and boats come in no particular order.
It could be. And we will. What else are we going to share? We don't have a whole lot of whiskey news this week. It's been a bit quiet on the old whiskey news front, which is good because we've been busy enough trying to catch up with ourselves.
We have indeed. You've been spoiling everyone this week as well, Barry, with your several appearances online. We had obviously Wednesday with Buillock and then the Dunville's tasting on Friday.
Do you know what? It's a tough old calling. It's a vocation rather than a job, you know. But we have to follow the whiskey and follow the thirst.
Someone has to do it.
3 nights, yeah, that's true. 3 all nights.
3 nights indeed. I saw we have Brendan Carty in the house as well.
Hi, Brendan.
Evening, Brendan.
We'll see you on Tuesday.
We will indeed. We're knocking on your door in the early hours of Tuesday morning.
Not too early. Not too early.
I'm joking.
Hi to Mike in Fort Myers and who else? Julie in Columbus. And we've got folks from all over and folks joining us from Ireland as well. So what should we start with tonight? Well, I mean, we've got a whiskey in our glass. You've got your Palo Cortado, your Dunville's Palo Cortado. I've got my Gold Spot. We don't have any whiskey news. I mean, there are a good few whiskies we know of that are coming, but they're not really ready for the prime time or they haven't been announced officially. So hopefully we'll be able to announce those in the coming weeks. But for now, we'll probably just crack on with the old what we've got to cover tonight. So look, we'll start with a few updates from Stories and Sips. Let me change our setup here. We've got a very fancy new setup here. We've arranged ourselves suitably. So as Lauren was saying, it was a busy old week in the world of Stories and Sips. We had a great event Wednesday night and Friday night. Friday night, we had a fantastic tasting with Jarlath Watson and Seamus Ogue from Dunville's, from Ecklinville Distillery. We tasted our 19-year-old single malt. Great night. Great to see so many of you on there tasting it with us. Fantastic to get the background to the story of the whiskey, the story of the Dunville's brand, its amazing history going all the way back to 1808, and the story of Ecklinville and what they're planning to do over the next few weeks and months as well. If you missed that, it's available. The replay is available on our website, storiesandsips.com. And if you're not yet a member of the club, that replay is available. It's open. There's no login needed. It's just on the webpage there. Just go to our homepage, storiesofsips.com. You can watch that replay and get a taste of what we get inside the club when we have these great events and great whiskies. So thanks to everyone who turned up for that. And we also, as Lauren said, had a great tour, the world's shortest tour of the world's smallest distillery. Michael Orr Boyle took us on a tour of his wonderful 2-room cottage that is also Ireland's smallest distillery. He could have done the whole thing from his office chair, but he got up at one point and turned around and stood up and left the chair for about 18 seconds, but then discovered that by walking around the distillery, he found himself back at the chair after 18 seconds. So I had to sit back down again.
He just needed a stretch of the legs, I think, at that point, more than anything else.
Honestly, yeah. I mean, and you wouldn't get much of a stretch now walking from one end of that distillery to the other.
I tell you.
We were joking. You were on that as well, Lauren. You had tuned in, and we were joking about trying to bring a bus up to see Michael in Baillock, and he said, "There's nothing to see." We're 3 miles off the main road.
How many turns in the road do you reckon a 50-seater bus would have to do to get back down there? In the depths of winter as well, like it wouldn't be the most pleasant experience in the world.
No, it wouldn't. So we might not get a bus to visit Michael, but we'll bring Michael to visit us somewhere. But it was a great chance to talk about what drives a maker and what drives the people behind the madness that is the building, the operating, the marketing, the production in a distillery. I'm always in awe of the risks that people will take and the lengths people will go to follow a dream, a passion, an interest. And Michael talked about starting making whiskies in pressure cookers in Australia, making spirits in pressure cookers, and moving on to his own slightly bigger version of a pressure cooker now in the form of a copper pot still, a couple of them, and what he's doing to just take the goodness of the land and make something from it, from the land that's all around him. And I think it's a lovely, inspiring thing when somebody is maybe doing a thing that many will wait until their retirement to pursue a thing they love. First, we got to have the job. And when I retire, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to distill a few spirits. Michael said, there's no waiting for retirement. We're doing it now. A man with a bit of vision. It's
it's unbelievable when you speak to people like Dahi or Nick Ryan behind Home and Gate. They kind of say, I left a really well-paid, solid job to pursue something that's a bit of a risk, but it's a labor of love to them, and it's something that they really, it's their passion and they want to pursue it. So they do.
It's great to see it, and like Michael is turning out at peak capacity between 1 and 2 barrels of spirit a week, which compare that to the juggernaut in the industry, which is the Middleton Distillery churning out 3,000 barrels a day. And poor old Michael up there with his 1.5, 2 barrels a week. God love him.
And he's slaving away over it as well.
He is. I'd say he's probably under more pressure than the 3,000 barrels a day in Middleton, I'd say.
Without fail.
If you missed that Meet the Maker event, catch it on our website, storiesandsips.com. All of our Meet the Maker events are up there. We've had Meet the Makers with everyone from Alex Thomas and Bushmills. Lauren was there at the time. We've had Meet the Makers with Kevin O'Gorman in Middleton in the private setting of the old A2 warehouse. We've had Meet the Makers with Brendan Carty, who's here. Brendan was our first ever Meet the Maker back in October 2021. And so we've got many. Every month there's a Meet the Maker event, so they're all in there. So we have another one coming up in August with the Clancy family from Loughree Distillery on the banks of the River Shannon. So we're excited to share that with you and hear their story, a family story, 2 brothers and a sister distilling on the banks of the River Shannon, which would lend itself to a whiskey boat of sorts or a whiskey cruise. And we're here talking about boats tonight. It's all tying together. Laura, I don't know if you noticed, but I put on a t-shirt with little anchors on it for the whole boat thing tonight.
No. Paying homage to your past and also our future experiences. I like it.
Our seafaring past, present and future is being recognised in the form of a nautical t-shirt tonight.
Basically, wherever there is a way to reach a distillery, whether it's via air, boat or bus, we will get there somehow. Nothing will stop us.
And we'll talk about boats in a little bit. And I know there's some of you here on the tuning in tonight who are joining us on one of our experiences at upcoming whiskey buses. So we'll talk about that. Quickly on Stories and Sips, we do have some upcoming tastings and releases. I know we're only just finished with one of our great whiskey bottlings, whiskey releases, collaborations with Dunville's, our 19-year-old single malt, which we have here. I might crack into that in a little bit. But we have another one coming soon, which we'll talk about in a second. And we've also got a sample tasting opportunity, a blind tasting coming. And the only thing holding that up right now is these things. A shortage of little plastic bottles or little glass bottles that are en route from Germany presently, and I hope they land in Cork this week. And as soon as they do, we will be decanting 18 bottles of this size into 700 or 800 little minis like this, and getting those tasting kits available for you. 4 samples, which will be going into your tasting kits of 4 different whiskies from the same distillery. It's going to be a great time. We're going to do a tasting event in August with the distiller, the master distiller of the distillery, and we're going to have some fun with it. A blind tasting. I won't tell you anything about it until I'll announce it fully, hopefully in the next week. That's coming. We will be following that tasting event with a tasting event from Waterford Distillery in September or October as well. So stay tuned for those. And then we also, this Friday, will be announcing the details of our next Stories and Sips Whiskey Club whiskey. Woo! No applause. Lauren's not even clapping. Boo.
Hot on I'm hot on the heels of Dunville's.
You're supposed to be the hype woman there in the corner. We're going to announce our next whiskey we're going to tease it on Friday and share more details of it with you, and we will have that available for you to order in very late July or the first week in August. So stay tuned for that. I'm excited, very excited for our next release. I won't share any more on that right now, except to say that there are oats and wheat in it. We'll leave it at that. There's oats and wheat for the first time in any of our releases. So that's good. That's good news.
Just the point you were saying there about blind tastings, I love them because it makes everyone question everything they have ever learned or been taught about whiskey. You doubt everything. You doubt every aroma. You doubt every flavor. You doubt every style of whiskey. It's actually quite entertaining. Nothing
shows how little we collectively know about whiskey than a blind tasting.
Exactly.
You'd almost be afraid to offer a suggestion on what you're tasting for fear it's not even from that country.
Exactly. It's just way off. Exactly. It's so funny. It's even when you get a group of like ambassadors in a room and they're nosing and tasting whiskey, someone's bought them blind and they're like, no one has any clue. It's great.
I want to call out in the best way some of our members, our club members, and our Facebook group members who are in the audience here. I see them commenting tonight. There are a number of people who have grown their whiskey journey, expanded their whiskey knowledge. They've dived deeper and deeper into the world of Irish whiskey to the point where they now host Irish whiskey tastings themselves. And I want to give them a round of applause and a kudos tonight. Stacey Stearns is in the audience. Brian Redden is in the audience. Dave Borges, I'm not sure if he's in the audience. I'm probably missing out on a few people too. Lisa Quarton has hosted whiskey tastings. Let me see, there's maybe a few others as well. And I really just, it gives me no end of joy to see people coming in to the group, the club, and over a period of months or years, just learning from one another. We all learn from each other, and then taking that passion and sharing the knowledge, the joy, the excitement, the whiskies with others, so that this community of Irish whiskey fans grows and grows and grows over time. What a great thing for the world of Irish whiskey to have so many ambassadors from New York to Ohio to California. We've got coast to coast covered. Brian down there in the Celtic Irish Fest in Cincinnati today, pouring Irish whiskey. Now, he was pouring a bit of scotch as well, but we won't talk about that. But he was pouring Irish whiskey. So kudos and congratulations.
We'll let Brian off with that one. He's largely spreading the gospel of Irish whiskey, so we'll let that one slide.
I'm sure he was just serving the scotch to give a poor comparison to the Irish whiskey.
I reckon. Like this is how not to do it. Yeah.
That's probably it. There's no other excuse. But anyway, congratulations, folks. Fair play. You're flying the flag for Irish whiskey, and that's good for all of us. If last thing on the club, for those of you who do want to try new Irish whiskies, who want to sample whiskies that you've never had before, that maybe aren't even released yet, or are on their way to the United States, or just released in the United States, and you want access to whiskies you can't get anywhere else on planet Earth except through us, our whiskey club, feel free to join storiesandsips.com/club. We have some great releases coming down the line. I just remembered another tasting event we're going to be doing in January or February, and that's with Method and Madness. So we've got a Method and Madness tasting coming up. I know that's next year, but it's already on the calendar, and there will be samples of the new Method and Madness Gariana, which is heading to the US in late 2023, early 2024. So that's coming as well. So we've got lots of things coming. So anyway, stay tuned. Stay tuned. All right.
Gariana release is definitely one of my favorites I've tried this year so far. Absolutely unbelievable. Big fan.
Best Method and Madness for the price point that I've tasted yet. Best Method and Madness. Yeah.
I agree.
Really enjoyed it. All right. So tonight's all about bonders and boats. Before we get to the boats, we have to get to the bonders, don't we?
Without the bonders, we wouldn't have any whiskey to taste on boats in some occasions. So we'll start where we need to.
It's a fact. It's a fact. Before we do that, if you've just joined, you're very welcome. We are going to dive into the world of whiskey bonding. We're going to share some new Irish whiskey experiences that we're launching in the next couple of weeks. If you haven't hit the like button underneath this video, how dare you? We're expecting you to hit the like button. It costs you nothing. And hit the subscribe button if you're not following us on YouTube. And spread the word to all of your whiskey friends, family, enemies, colleagues, whomever would be interested perhaps in joining in the crack. So we got a question this week in our Facebook community, Irish Whiskey Fans of America, which prompted what tonight's main focus is going to be. And that's around the topic of bonds, whiskey bonding, the word bond, and its usage historically, its usage internationally, and most importantly to us here, its usage in the world of Irish whiskey. And it can be a bit of a complicated one, Lauren, can't it?
Very much so. And the differences even between the US and what bonding is in the US, how it's regulated, versus Ireland, where there's really not any regulations in place at all. It's so interesting how two massive industries producing whiskey, bourbon and whiskey, are so different, and there's such a contrast between them.
That's right. So we thought we'd dive into it. We thought we'd examine it and help maybe break down some of the confusion and some of the what can be some confusion around some of the descriptions, because as the world of Irish whiskey grows and there are more options available, it can be helpful to us as consumers to know what we're reading on the labels, what does it mean, if anything, and how does that affect what we're paying for the whiskey, what it's going to taste like, and so forth. So we're always kind of thinking the more we know, the better informed we are, the better consumers we can be ultimately. So we might as well start with the phrase bottled in bond, because the question that came in this week was really about that. So by way of explanation, I will utilize our very own bottle here, which comes from Talnua Distillery in Colorado, Arvada, Colorado, just outside Denver. And this is a whiskey. This was the first ever American whiskey released as a bottled in bond single pot still whiskey. And this was released in, I always forget the date, but this was 2021, wasn't it? Wasn't 2022 anyway, I think 2021. And this was released in collaboration with us in Stories and Sips, our Irish Whiskey Fans of America group. And it was a single cask, the first ever cask that had achieved the status that's legally defined in the United States for the phrase bottled in bond. And it's a somewhat sought after phrase. It ensures that there are certain protections, certain criteria have been met, and it's something that helps the consumer understand what the whiskey is and how it was produced. The phrase bottled in bond in America is cast in stone, enshrined in law, and that goes all the way back to the late 1800s. And I'm not going to I didn't memorize the entire law, but I will read out a little bit here to help us go through it. So the term bottle and bond dates back to the late 19th century. when concerns about quality and adulteration in the whiskey industry led to the passage of the Bottled in Bond Act of 1897. This act, enacted by the US Congress, established strict regulations for labeling and production methods to ensure the integrity and authenticity of American whiskey. The key requirements of the phrase bottle and bond, or so to earn the title or the bottle and bond label, a whiskey must meet the following requirements. Now, interestingly, bottle and bond doesn't just apply to whiskey. It can apply to other spirits too, but it's utilized mostly or recognized mostly in the whiskey world. So the requirements are: it must be distilled by one distiller. The whiskey must be distilled within the same distilling season, which is either January to June or July to December, by one distiller at a single distillery. So you can't vat multiple casks from different periods together, different seasons, different years. You can't bring whiskey from other distilleries. So it is a kind of a single distillery, single distiller, single season. It also must be aged for at least 4 years in a federally bonded warehouse. So the term bond here already coming up. A federally bonded warehouse is very simply a government licensed space warehouse to store whiskey until such time as tax is payable on it. So a federally bonded warehouse for a minimum of 4 years. And then it must be bottled at 100 proof or 50% ABV without any dilution or any additives. And it has to be produced in the United States. It's a designation unique to the world of American spirits and whiskey, and it requires the whiskey to be produced and aged in the United States. Now, according to our sources, the significance and the benefits of that designation for the world of American whiskey is that there's a quality assurance aspect. So the strict regulations guarantee a level of quality and consistency. There's transparency and authenticity, and there's a historical legacy dating all the way back to the late 19th century. And it covers various styles of whiskey: corn, bourbon, rye whiskey as well. And so that is what bottle and bond means in the United States, which is where our story starts, because no such criteria apply to the phrase in Ireland. So I have that one whiskey that has the legally protected phrase bottled and bond on it, and I have our own Dunville's single cask, single malt from our collaboration with the team there from last month that we tasted this week. It also says bottled and bond on the label, but here's the thing. It has no federal protection, no legal protection, no legal or even, there's no definition at all, is there, in the word bond in terms of marketing a whiskey in Ireland?
That's it. And I think it's something that's quite interesting, and probably one of the, I'd say, issues or problems that's coming with an Irish whiskey industry that is seeing the revival of terms like bonding. You know, what Louise McGuan, founder of JJ Corey, was the first bonder in Ireland in over 50 years. So these are problems that haven't had to be considered in the industry for this period of time. I mean, bonding, the practice of bonding whiskey in Ireland was such a huge part of the industry in the 1800s and into the early 20th century as well. Every single town almost in Ireland had a whiskey bonder. And they obviously, like a lot of the Irish whiskey industry, it went into decline in the early sort of 1900s, 1930s onwards. And this issue didn't have to be thought about until a few years ago. So it's just interesting that these issues are cropping up with the growth of the industry, isn't it?
So every whiskey in Ireland has been inside a bonded warehouse, every single whiskey. So you can't have an Irish whiskey without it having been aged entirely in a government or the Department of Revenue in Ireland, or as in the case north of the border, HMRC, His Majesty's Revenue and Customs. They monitor and set in place the structure and the standards and the requirements of the warehouse, the aging aspect of whiskey in the north, just like in the south, the Revenue Department of Revenue, part of the Irish government does. So how is a bond defined in Ireland? So if every whiskey in Ireland has been aged in a bonded warehouse, where is there confusion? What does it mean, bottle and bond? So the phrase bottle and bond quite literally means that the whiskey was bottled in an environment that is a bonded warehouse or a bonded facility where a bond is very simply a promise to pay the government the tax or the excise duty that becomes payable on the spirit inside that warehouse once it leaves the warehouse. So bonded warehouses in Ireland act like they are like tax suspended facilities. And the benefit of this, and it goes back to probably the spirit of the Excise Act in the 1800s in Ireland, where there was an advantage to being able to store whiskey for long periods of time without tying up all your cash in paying the government the taxes due on it. You were able to defer the tax due, allowed you to invest in more stock. And as the stock appreciated in age, maybe it appreciated in value. And then when you sold it on to the consumer, the tax became due not by its age, but by its alcohol, by volume, its ABV. And then you wrote a check to the government, you gave them a bag of gold coins or your firstborn child or whatever you did. And then they took the payment on it. So these bonded warehouses all across the island of Ireland, which exist to store age mature whiskey, are basically tax suspended facilities that are required under European law, Irish law, which forms part of European law, for the determination, the designation that is Irish whiskey. Irish whiskey, to become whiskey, must be aged on the island of Ireland for no less than 3 years in a government-approved bonded warehouse. And that bonded warehouse must be government inspected. It must be approved. This bond that you, whether you're a distillery or an independent bonder or an independent storage facility for whiskey, you will have had to pay the government a fee for the rights to be inspected. And the criteria for managing these bonded facilities is so onerous on small businesses. So I found the 77-page manual that applies to warehousing spirits, 77 pages of requirements. And the reason is because of the tax dollars, the tax euros that are stored in those warehouses. So the Irish government doesn't look at those warehouses like, aren't they the most romantic places, smelling gorgeous? And isn't that a lovely smell of mahogany or oak or what have we got? No, they look at them as, that's where our 400 million euros of tax revenue in spirits lives, and it's not in our coffers. So we have to protect it as if it's a bank, and they do protect it. They can monitor it any time. They can inspect it. You have to let a government inspector, revenue inspector, in at their behest. Back in the day, you had to provide accommodation to the excise inspector, the excise duty inspector, who would come and he'd have the key. Maybe he would be the only one with the key to your warehouse, and nobody else had it.
The tax man sees barrels. I mean, what did I say last week? The feeling of opening a warehouse is like your food coming in a restaurant. Rather than seeing a barrel, he sees a little roll of cash sitting on racks in a warehouse. Because I said to you earlier, Barry, it's quite interesting how regulated the taxes on bonded warehouses versus the actual category as a whole. It's quite interesting, the difference, where, as you say, money's involved. It's much more strictly regulated than who can buy a cask of whiskey or distill it and age it. And in Bushmills, in the bottling area, just kind of off to the side of the bottling area, there is literally a cage with kind of barrels which had leaked, or barrels which had defects or issues with them. Because if a barrel was, sitting on a rack warehouse or whatever, and the taxman came and noticed that there was half of it gone and nothing had been declared or whatever, he expected to know where that spirit had gone. So they had to prove that there was a leak in the barrel in order that they wouldn't be fined or whatever it may be. So they had a barrel prison in the corner.
It is amazing how monitored it is and how enforced it is. And there's strict penalties for failure to keep the right books, for failure to basically satisfy the inspector as to whether it's a loss or something missing or something not recorded, that beyond any reasonable doubt, like you have, to the best of human abilities, you have recorded every movement in and out of the warehouse, of the bonded warehouse. So if you ever go to a whiskey tasting in Ireland, you might see some bottles that have been drawn from, full of whiskey that have been drawn from casks, and very often it'll say on the bottles, duty paid samples. So as soon as they came out of the warehouse and they went to the brand ambassador's car, or you lived this way, Lauren, for many years, somebody along the way, whoever drew it out of the cask, had to record exactly what came out. That has to be added to the inventory system to track where that liquid went, the duty paid on it before it went to the tasting event, because once it leaves the bonded warehouse, the duty, excise duty becomes due to the government, whether you take money for it or not. So like, you're giving away samples at a tasting, you're still owing the government all the duty on the whiskey that was produced rather than the whiskey that was consumed.
That's exactly it. And, I think people and ambassadors who are maybe new to the ambassador role, think it's just a matter of ringing up the distillery and asking for 12 cask samples. But there are, as you said, Barry, those processes and regulations you have to follow to get them in the boot of your car and down to a tasting in Cork, for example, and into your house.
And Tony has a question there, which is good timing. He asked, well, what about the Cliffs of Moher release? So I have this bottle right here. So this was our release 2 releases ago. Our last release before Dunville's was our Shortcross single malt. Before that, we had 3 different releases from J.J. Corrie called the Cliffs of Moher. And this whiskey proved a bonding education to us, because what happened with this whiskey, for those of you who are not familiar, is Louise McGuane, J.J. Corrie, matured the whiskies on her farm. Her government bonded warehouse exists on the farm. Probably have a picture of it here somewhere. Here we go. And this is the J.J. Corrie farm, where her library of spirits, her library of whiskies are aging. And Louise had 9 50-litre barrels, quarter casks, that she brought in a unique project to the Cliffs of Moher, one of the most famous tourist destinations on the west of Ireland, and 700 feet above the Atlantic Ocean in O'Brien's Tower, which is not a bonded warehouse. She put the casks of whiskey that we at Stories and Sips selected from to release to our members. We ended up selecting 3 of the casks, 3 of the barrels. And when it came time to labeling, you have to submit your labels to the Department of, to the Health and Safety Authority Executive in Ireland and the Department of Agriculture, and they review the labels to make sure that they check all the boxes for what happened during the journey of that whiskey. How long was it under bond? When did it come out of bond? And they recognize that the date when it came out of bond but didn't leave a barrel, and the date that it left the barrel to go into a bottle, differed by about 6 months. And they wanted to know, well, where did the whiskey go? Because in their mind, the duty became due when the whiskey left her farm to drive the 30 minutes to O'Brien's Tower on the Cliffs of Moher on the west of Ireland, where it further aged. Now, in Louise's mind, and I would be in the same mindset, it had matured fully in the sense that it had reached its 3 years of maturation in the bonded warehouse. Therefore, there should be no issue with it aging in O'Brien's Tower. The government saw it a little bit differently, and they said, well, no, all of its maturation must happen in a fully bonded warehouse, not just a portion of it. So what was the result of that? Well, Louise said, well, we can fight it, but it'll take about 6 months. I said, the thirst I have and our members have will not last 6 months. Don't be worrying about that. What's our alternative? And she said, we can call it whiskey. We can't call it Irish whiskey. So it went through all of the same, I mean, for all intents and purposes, it followed the route of an Irish whiskey, except for the final 6 months, it moved from a warehouse that the government inspected to a tower that the government didn't inspect. And just because of that, it could only be called the Cliffs of Moher whiskey and not the Cliffs of Moher Irish whiskey, which, isn't that amazing?
It's so interesting as well, because obviously then your mind would naturally go to the regulation. Well, it's still matured on the island of Ireland, so it's still Irish whiskey.
That's right.
It's so technically there definitely would have been grounds to challenge that, but as you say, time is money and there's a thirst.
and I mentioned it to a few distillers in Ireland at the time, and they said, oh, you should fight that. They said, no, you'll get the designation of Irish whiskey. And if we had a much bigger supply beyond 210 bottles. If we were trying to shift 20,000 bottles in containers to go across the Atlantic, maybe it'd be worth fighting for. But I think it added to the story. Like, we almost supplied Sharpies. We should have, to add the word Irish. When you got it, you could just write the word Irish on the label. Sticking it to the man.
Just a little Sharpie pen to 200 odd bottles.
And we're not the only. So we're not the only. We weren't the only release in the last few years that couldn't call itself Irish whiskey, despite it having so many attributes that we might say, well, of course it's Irish whiskey. Another one is Clare Island whiskey, which isn't whiskey at all. So this is some of you will be familiar with this beautiful bottle, by the way. This is, I have to hide my eyes because the camera tracks my eyes. This is Clare Island, but you might notice it says on it single malt spirit drink, not single malt whiskey. This can't even be called whiskey. So this takes it a step further. So what this is about 3.5-year-old single malt that was produced in Connacht Distillery in Ballina, County Mayo, transferred into bourbon barrels, ex-bourbon barrels, 200-litre ex-bourbon barrels, brought a half-hour drive to Clare Island, which is off the coast of Mayo in Clew Bay, off the coast of Westport. And then the barrel was put onto a boat called the Dolphin in the harbour of Clew Bay, where it spent, I think, a year resting in the boat, going up and down in the waves, trying to soak in all of that movement. See, I'm perfectly replicating it with my maritime t-shirt. And by the time it had reached its maturation, or it was deemed ready, it went time to bottling it, and the Irish government said, no, it didn't age on the island of Ireland. Now you get into debate about, well, what is the island of Ireland? Is it the land? Is it, by maritime law, everything up to 12 miles offshore? Because 12 miles, you're in international waters. I know that from my seafaring days. Less than that, you're still in Irish waters. Is it because the federally bonded warehouse, the government bonded warehouse? But they said, no, it wasn't in a warehouse and it wasn't on the island of Ireland. Therefore, it's just a spirit drink. So what do you do?
Again, there's grounds to challenge that, because as we know, 40% ABV is the minimum for whiskey. So you're saying, it's below 40%, therefore it's a spirit drink, but it's not a spirit drink, it's whiskey. That's madness. It's absolute madness.
But I think it adds to the story, because with a small release like whatever it was, 200 bottles of this that Clare Island has, they're not putting them on a shelf in Omaha, Nebraska, hoping somebody will spot it and go, oh, I'd love a good single malt spirit drink. They know that their audience is different.
Yeah, exactly.
Kevin,
but it begs... Sorry, Barry, go ahead.
Kevin was asking if the Cliffs portion had been a finishing instead of a maturation, would that have made a difference? So it was actually a finishing. So it did a full maturation in JJ Corrie, and then it did a finishing, but it wouldn't have made a difference. It was, by the way the government describe it, if it left the bonded warehouse for 5 minutes in a wooden barrel, it is no longer Irish whiskey. Isn't that the case? So unless you're traveling between bond, like there's a period, I don't know exactly how it works, but I know that you can transfer whiskey between bonds, and that the road journey doesn't remove.
Yeah, because is that not the same principle that like Copeland Distillery have some barrels resting in Ecklinville's warehouses because they don't have the space? Is so that technically covers, because you're transporting from one distillery into a bond?
My understanding is that you need a government-approved transporter. So you need in the north, you need an HMRC-approved courier. In the south, you need a revenue-approved courier to transport whiskey. And I think maybe the bond must cover them.
That's wild. It begs the question, doesn't it? As you know, there are more distilleries coming up, and as the industry widens and grows, will we have to look at the technical file? You know, that the technical file will have to be revised at some point, surely, to include places like Clare Island coming into play. Yeah,
it's interesting. Well, look, if there's a man who'd know about bonds, it's our man. our man on the inside, Mr. Eric Flynn, who's doing great work for us at the moment with Stories and Sips, he's right. You're right, Barry. Whiskey can move between bonded warehouse under a warrant. Now, I don't suspect it's like a multi-year warrant that for years it can wander around the country aimlessly, having an old cup of tea in a corner cafe. But I wonder how long the warrant lasts for. Is it just point-to-point, direct route? That'd be interesting.
It's like Father Ted, if anyone's familiar. The money was just resting on my account. The barrel was just resting in the boot of my car for 4 years.
I've heard many anecdotal stories of barrels and boots of cars going where they shouldn't be going between distilleries in Ireland.
Nothing new there. Unfortunately, that doesn't count.
So there's really interesting laws that govern the bond and the 77-page manual about what you can do and who needs to be trained and aware inside the warehouse in terms of managing it and the sequencing of casks inside your warehouse. And there's so much to it. It's a fascinating thing. If anybody wants a 77-page manual, message me and I'll send it to them. I'll send them the Department of Revenue 77-page manual, get you to sleep. Jeff wants to know, is the tax due when it leaves the bond or when it's placed into the bottle for sale? It's when it leaves the bond, Jeff. And there's another tax that's due when the bottle goes for sale. So and to give you some sense of why whiskey is so expensive, Irish whiskey specifically, Ireland has the second or third highest rate of excise duty in Europe after Sweden or Finland, depending on when you're counting it. Ireland's duty rates are excise duty 42.57 euros for every litre of pure alcohol. That means that a 700 milliliter bottle at about 40% has about 12 to 13 euros of tax due. So in Ireland, when you buy a 30 euro bottle of Jameson off the shelf, 12 or 13 euros went to the government in excise duty. 23% of the cost of the bottle went to them in value-added tax. So a 30 euro bottle will have 18, 19 euros of taxes in that 30 euros. Now the duty becomes comparatively cheaper when you go up the scale of bottles, in the sense of a 1,000 euro bottle doesn't have a higher duty rate, but it'll have, of course, a higher VAT rate. 23% on 1,000 is 230, but the VAT or the tax, the excise duty will still be the same. It's calculated on the alcohol by volume. So that's why high strength alcohol, so cask strength alcohols, have much higher duty rates. So when we released our Shortcross whiskey at 66% ABV, the duty payable on that was 16, almost 17 euros a bottle, just on the duty portion alone, because of the high ABV. So there could be anywhere from 12 to 17 euros per bottle in the duty. And that's payable when it leaves the warehouse. And then the VAT, the value-added tax, is paid by the consumer, collected by the retailer, and then the retailer pays, ultimately, the government the value-added tax.
It's insane.
And there's just, it's a tax. I mean, it's an absolute windfall for the government, 400 million euro at least a year, which has been about the same, up and down, fluctuated through COVID for the last few years. 400 million just in spirits, much higher in alcohol generally, but 400 million plus in spirits. So it's a huge, huge tax take for the government that they monitor, and they monitor it, and there's no getting around it. Like, there's every single drop that's produced, they know based on the size of the stills and what's going in there and the amount of barley used and the size of the wash and the temperature that you're distilling at and the capacity and the potential, what you should be making, and the feints, those bits that are the cuts that are recycled. They understand where they need to know where those go and how they're reused, and it's all tracked and traced. But I suppose that's the cost of us having a smile on our face, I suppose.
Small price to pay for great whiskey.
Maybe it is. Maybe it is. That was probably one slide of like 40 slides we have on the bond. There was, I wanted to talk about briefly the history of whiskey bonding. So it's not a new thing that we store whiskey in bonded warehouses, but what is new is the rise of the independent whiskey bonder. And Eric Flynn used to work, was instrumental in the growth of one such independent whiskey bonder, JJ Corrie, and Louise McGuan, who's a friend to us, has, and we've done 4 bottles with Louise over the past few years, from the Story to the Three Cliffs Moher releases. She's been instrumental in trying to get changes made to legislation and flying the flag for independent whiskey bonding. And I think that's an important distinction, the independent whiskey bonder, as opposed to a distillery that has hundreds of warehouses. Like Middleton has 133, 134 warehouses that are all under one bond, one distillery bond. And they have their distillery bonded warehouses that are treated by revenue exactly the same as Louise, who's got one bonded warehouse in her farm currently. But she's an independent bonder, which means that's slightly different than, it's different to a distillery, it's different to a whiskey bottler, and it's different to an independent warehouse storage business that has a bond. Now we're going to get confusing.
I think, yeah, Louise is kind of campaigning and championing what exactly a bonder is to be more regulated, because I think her theory is, anybody essentially could buy distillate or whiskey or whatever it may be from a distillery, and there's no real regulation around it. Sure, you said earlier, Barry, when she was kind of creating JJ Corrie back in 2015, they didn't know what to do with her. They didn't know how to kind of set up an independent bonder. That's
right. I mean, these tax suspended facilities independent of distilleries are a relatively new thing in our generation. The old whiskey bonders died out in the 1930s, 1940s. There was a time when every town had some form of a whiskey bonder, illegal or legal, mostly legal as the time progressed. But as the whiskey industry started to collapse at the turn of the 20th century in Ireland, so too did these independent bonders. And JJ Corrie itself is named after one of those old whiskey bonders of old from Kilrush in County Clare. And JJ was a whiskey bonder, a grocer. The first whiskey that JJ Corrie released, the Gale, was named after his bicycle. Their whiskey, the Hanson, is named after the excise duty inspector that used to come and check on the tax that was due by JJ on the spirits that he had in his bond. And so there's rich history going back many, many years. And also bear in mind that for many distilleries back in the 1800s, and even many of them in the early 1900s, they didn't bottle their own whiskey. They often sent it off to either independent bottlers or independent bonders. And the two are not always the same. So a bottler is not always a bonder. A bonder is not always a bottler. So we'll talk about that in a second. But the history of it is rich. It was a part of the Irish whiskey industry for many, many years. And it's only in the past few years we've seen this return, because there's enough stock from different distilleries out there for bonders to say, I'm going to select from this distillery and that distillery, and I'm going to grow a library of spirits, and I'm going to blend them to customers' requirements. I'm going to store them. I'm going to age them further. And that's created this whole new category. Now, just because a whiskey bottle from Ireland says whiskey bonder on it, sadly, that doesn't mean that they are a whiskey bonder. And there's no legal recourse for it at the moment. And Louise at JJ Corrie and others make the argument that you couldn't put the word distillery on your bottle if you weren't a distillery. You shouldn't be able to put the word bonder on a bottle if you're not a whiskey bonder.
And it raised a point we talked about earlier, where, maybe upcoming distilleries are in the process of building a distillery. And they might even have reached the point where they are distilling and they're calling themselves bonders. And it's that kind of gray area. It's like, well, are you technically a bonder if you have your own distillery? So it's that regulation. It's just not there.
Louise has, back in 2018, wrote an article as she was going down that road of discovering or reviving this this lost art, as she phrased it, of whiskey bonding, and kind of sharing her journey and the challenges she was facing and what she reckoned needed to be done. This is back in 2018, and she had some good points that she raised. So back in 2018, she was making the point that JJ Corrie is a revenue verified Irish whiskey maturation facility, They don't distill their own spirit. They source casks with particular flavor profiles. They source spirit from distilleries. They match casks to spirits. They mature it in their own controlled bonded warehouse, oversee the maturation process, blend it and taste it on site, or blend it and bottle it on site. And in the case of mature whiskey releases, we source living casks, not bulk inert whiskey, and we blend and bottle on site. So this was Louise setting the putting a stake in the ground and saying, to us, this is what a whiskey bonder is. A whiskey bonder does these things. Now, another whiskey bonder might say, I have a different version of it. So it's Louise's version. But what's important, I think, to note in this is what takes place within JJ Corrie here. Now, they're going further than just bonding. They're not just storing it there. They're eventually blending it, bottling it, which you could argue goes beyond just the bonding role. But this is what Louise defines as a whiskey bonder. So there are very few, even still to this day, whiskey bonders that do all these things in Ireland. There's very few. Maybe there's a handful of them. Maybe there's a few more. The likes of Two Stacks, the likes of W.D. O'Connell. They are the ones, they all do the maturation, the blending, and the bottling for the most part on site. There are other businesses that are bonded warehouses, like the largest bonded warehouses outside of Middleton in the island of Ireland are in a county that has no distillery whatsoever, Wexford. And there you have Stafford Bonded, where most of the new distilleries and most of the brands in Ireland mature their whiskies. Massive facility. They also built and manage the warehouses for Waterford Distillery in Waterford, just about half an hour drive from the distillery. Now, Staffords do offer blending and bottling services as well, but there's a range, there's probably a half dozen or more independent storage facilities that are bonded. Little Island Bonded Warehouse, or Cork Bonded Warehouse Company in Little Island in Cork, and on and on. But you'd argue that that's not a whiskey bonder so much as a bonded warehouse. And there's a difference, isn't there?
Yeah, massively. And it's that point as well. You know, Louise is very adamant that she had no intention of building a distillery. She didn't want to set up a grain to glass distillery. It was the purpose-built rack house on the family farm, and her intent was to create a library of whiskey flavors with distillates, as you said earlier, from other distilleries, really unique barrels, kind of cask. I mean, she was the first Irish whiskey tequila aged release as well, a number of years ago. So that kind of being the kind of trailblazer for unique flavor profiles is all she intended. And it's kind of like, as you say, Barry, where does that point end, where she's a blender and a bonder, or just a bonder? It's, yeah, back into that grey area.
It could definitely do with a bit of maybe a bit of legislation definition that would be helpful to a growing industry. But it's no criticism of the industry. It's no criticism of those who set the rules. This is so new. Things sometimes take a half a generation or longer to be figured out, enshrined, take input from various stakeholders to establish what the criteria should be, etc., get feedback on it. But it is interesting to note that, like, all distilleries will send their spirit to a bonded warehouse, whether it's on site, whether it's off site, or whether they'll send it to an independent bonder who will then further age it themselves. A question that came in, which is worth answering as well, from Richard, is what's the difference between a bonder and a merchant? Well, this is where it gets tricky as well, because there's actually no definition as to what a merchant is. But I would argue that, so W.D. O'Connell whiskey merchants, he was a merchant before he was a bonder. In other words, he was buying and selling whiskey that was aging in other places that weren't under his own bond. So you have situations, confusingly, where whiskey businesses are subtenants of another bond. So if I want to start a whiskey company in the morning and I don't have the space, I can then go to Stafford Bonded in Wexford. I can go to Cork Bonded Warehouse Company, maybe in Cork, and I can go to Great Northern Distillery, maybe, and I can say, hey, I would like to age my whiskey with you. And they'll say, great, we already have a bond. We're going to charge you to be a tenant under our bond. But whether that makes you a bonder or not is for us to debate until the wee hours of the morning, until the cows come home or it's time for them to be milked, because there's nothing in law to tell us which one is right or wrong.
I actually think they have a really unique advantage on a distillery as well, because when you think of like, I mean, Bushmills is a perfect example. Single malt whiskey is all they produce, whereas the likes of Louise, she's able to bring in pot still, grain, malt, and just make really unique whiskies. Like she has such a library of blends and barrels, and it kind of puts them in a different level almost than a distillery that is bound to one type of spirit. And I think Louise's top three kind of things that she wanted to revolutionize within the industry was she wanted the modernization, the innovation, but most importantly, the transparency. And that's so important to her. She's so transparent with where her distillate comes from, where her casks come from, which I think is very much needed in the industry as it grows.
So for now, when you see the word bond on an Irish whiskey label, sadly, you're getting no more information than you had before you saw the word bond, because unless you know specifically about that company, you're not going to know if they have a bond or not. And that's sad. And it's one of those words that it's an easy buzzword, looks good on a label, doesn't really mean a whole lot in Ireland right now, but hopefully it does in time. But the first whiskey I cracked open tonight is a great example of the historic role bonding played in the growth of the Irish whiskey industry, and that was Gold Spot. So Gold Spot was released as a celebration of 135 years of whiskey bonding, or when the 135-year anniversary of the start of when the Mitchell family in Dublin first started bonding whiskey. And they went to the Jameson Distillery in Bow Street in Dublin. At the time, the Jameson Distillery would have been slow to partner with those who were maturing whiskey further. They would have partnered with bottlers more than they would have with bonders. But the Mitchell family convinced them of perhaps a symbiotic rather than a parasitic partnership, and they gave them the spirit, which they then aged further in their cellars under the streets of Dublin. There are pots of whiskey which was eventually released as the green spots, blue spots, red spots back in the day, back in the 1800s or early 1900s. And Gold Spot celebrates 135 years of this. Now, Mitchells are no longer whiskey bonders. They don't have a whiskey bond, to my knowledge. The cellars are still under the streets of Dublin, but now Middleton Distillery that produces this whiskey will age it in their bonded warehouses. So the label is keen to state it's a special release celebrating the anniversary of the Mitchell's whiskey bonding tradition, not 135 years of whiskey bonding. So slight difference there. And of course, maybe one of the most famous bonded brands of all in Ireland is Redbreast. And Redbreast went the same direction, partnered with the Jameson Distillery in Bow Street. And to this day, the maker of Jameson makes Redbreast. However, it's now owned by that company. Irish Distillers owns the Redbreast brand, but all the way up until the 1980s and early 1990s, the Redbreast brand was owned by others. It was owned by Gilbey's. It was owned by, there's another Irish company that owned it in between. The name is evading me. But they did the same thing. They aged stock in their cellars and their warehouses to the point where at one point, Redbreast and Gilbey's had more stock being matured in their cellars of this particular style of pot still than Jameson had maturing in their own warehouses. So there's a rich tradition of whiskey bonding. But speaking of the Bow Street Distillery, you might be surprised to know, or some of you might know, that it wasn't until 1963, almost 200 years after the foundation or formation of Jameson in Dublin, that they bottled their first whiskey themselves. Up until that point, they had external bottlers bottling their whiskey all over Ireland. The first whiskey that was bottled by Jameson was called Jameson Crested 10. Here's a version of Jameson Crested today, but I think we have a picture of Jameson of Crested up here. There it is. So there's one of the, on the left-hand side, that's got like a 1980s bottling of Crested 10. The one on the right is Crested. So Crested is to this day the longest in-house bottled brand that exists in Irish Distillers' portfolio. So before they were bottling even their regular Jameson, they bottled Crested 10. So it's the original bottled brand going all the way back to 1963. So if you visit Ireland, you're looking for something to pick up very affordably, I would pick up a bottle of Jameson Crest. It's a blended whiskey, but it's got a higher proportion of pot still whiskey in it than regular Jameson does compared to the grain. And I would order it all day long ahead of regular Jameson. But that was the first of the bottlings that took place in Bow Street.
I read an article as well, Barry, where kind of the Mitchell family really campaigned on behalf of bonders and to keep that art alive. I think it was after the kind of post World War II era, kind of when Irish distillers were formed. I think it was it the then chairman Kevin McCourt was actually going to cease supplying whiskey to bonders. But then the Mitchell family kind of did a little bit of a campaigning around the powers that be in various Dublin, I think, yacht clubs and things like that to kind of keep the art alive, and it worked. So he was really a champion of the bonding industry.
That's right. Like Green Spot at the time was the last surviving spot whiskey in the 1960s. And when Irish Distillers was formed in 1966, part of the consolidation was we got to take all of our whiskey in-house. We got to manage it for consistency reasons, etc. We need our own stock ourselves for export. We can't be giving it to third parties. But yeah, like you said, it was the well-heeled upper echelon of Dublin society that would have hung out in tennis clubs and yacht clubs that got very upset at the thought of Green Spot disappearing, that managed to ruffle enough feathers and threaten a scandal if they weren't guaranteed Green Spot would continue, which is why Green Spot is the only surviving whiskey, bonded whiskey, that made it from the old Bow Street distillery uninterrupted to the Middleton distillery to this day. In other words, Green Spot has never not been made since the day they first started it. Redbreast had a 8 to 10 year hiatus when it wasn't made. Green Spot didn't. So Green Spot is the only continuously produced, in fact, it's the only continuously produced pot still whiskey that was released through either Bow Street or Middleton.
That's fascinating, isn't it?
Isn't it?
So it's such an interesting history. Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Today, I mean, you talk about the history of bonding. We're seeing now a return to bonding. We're going to need more bonders because demand is out there for interesting flavors, and there's a market for it, and the likes of W.D. O'Connell and Chustacks and J.J. Corrie are showing that there's a pathway, there's a way, and it can be done very, very well, and that we as consumers are not just open to many distilleries' spirits being vatted, blended, married, combined. We're actually demanding it. We want to know, we want certain flavors, and that can come to your earlier point, Lauren. One distillery alone is hamstrung by what it can produce, as opposed to a bonder being able to decide what flavor they want and choose the spirits to get there.
Exactly. And I think it leads on from the transparency point as well. Like, we want to know, as you say, where the distillery comes, or, you know, where the distillate comes from. And I think if it comes from a fantastic distillery, it's just adding leverage to the brand, you know?
Eric has a great point there. With environment being a flavour influencer, our bonders with their own bonded warehouses located in their environment, bringing something a little different to tenants in the same warehouses. And I'd argue that he's right. And Louise, even with our Cliffs of Moher release, talked about how, though she didn't distill the whiskey, she was very clear and open, talking about how it came from Great Northern Distillery. She said it spent 6 years maturing in her environment in County Clare, soaking in that weather, that environment, those conditions, and all that come with it. And so it's a little bit of her own terroir, her own sense of place, which is why she was so proud to have a whiskey released with such an iconic fellow Clare business as the Cliffs of Moher. But I'd agree with that, Eric. Like, you can't, every single warehouse in Ireland has a different environment, and it brings that environment to the whiskey.
I think that's a fantastic point, and it's kind of it's a really nice little addition to the journey of a whiskey, isn't it? Kind of, you know, it's distilled in a certain area, and then it comes to another area, and it's influenced by where it rested. I think Louise does describe that there's a certain kind of briny influence from the whiskies that are aged in her warehouse, and I mean that's kind of how that really gave way to the J.J. Corrie brand. Essentially, their location in Kilrush, Barry, as you said earlier. The location of the grocer was at the mouth of the Shannon. So what went out was the likes of grain, butter, livestock, whatever it may have been. And then coming in was the port, the sherry, the fortified wine barrels, which led to him aging spirit in there. So it kind of, it's interesting how your location kind of gives way to a brand ultimately.
100%. And you'll hear this from the likes of another bonder that we haven't talked about actually is Sir Maurice O'Connell down in Killarney, and he has a bonded warehouse where he has shared with us on one of our Meet the Maker events available on storyships.com how there is a unique microclimate that comes in the south of Ireland. This Jetstream, Gulfstream. I always get these two mixed up. Yeah. One's an airplane and one is a pile of weather. But it comes in over the south of Ireland and it's warmer than comes in from the Caribbean, comes in from the Gulf of Mexico, and comes across the Atlantic. And the temperatures in the south of Ireland are slightly higher than the rest of Ireland. And I always talk about how growing up in Cove in County Cork, it was so natural that we saw palm trees growing in our town. We didn't think anything of it until I left Cove, and other towns in Ireland didn't have palm trees, and I was appalled. But they have them in Cove. And it's because the temperature's a little bit higher. And he talks about how he has more maturation time in his bonded warehouse year round than others do. Do you remember on Friday night, Jarlath talking about up in Ecklandville how between November and March almost nothing happens in the warehouses because it's too cold?
Yeah.
Maurice O'Connell says, not for me, Jarlath. He's basically saying down where I am in Killarney, it stays warmer and a little bit warmer, so there's still interaction between the spirit and the wood, even in those down months.
That's mad. But it's like some instances, when the temperature is higher, obviously the maturation is happening at an accelerated pace. It's like I remember seeing an example when I did my WSET course a year or so ago, and it was like, I think it was a 2-year-old bourbon versus like a 15-year-old whiskey, and it was nearly darker because of obviously the accelerated rate that it takes place at a higher temperature. It was wild. It's so interesting.
If you haven't yet hit the like button, we're appalled, we're upset, we won't recover. Hit the old like button there. We're going to move on to the next section. I could talk about whiskey bonding, I could talk about whiskey coopering, wood all day long, because it's just these are fascinating topics.
I think last week's kind of led so nicely into this week's, didn't it?
It really did. Yeah, honestly.
We're just obsessed with maturation, clearly.
We're just like, we got to get to that whiskey quick. Come on, mature it, come on. If anyone's got any requests, by the way, of topics that you'd like us to kind of dive into, cover, talk about, let us know in the chat, let us know in the comments anytime, and we'd be happy to adopt those ideas that we like and ignore those ideas that we don't like. But throw them in there anyway. We'd love to see them. We're talking about whiskey bonders and boats tonight. Lauren, this is the point of the night where I turn over the DJ equipment to you, and I think it's your turn to maybe lead us from bonding to boats.
I think it is my turn. Please be prepared for an image that's coming at you in about 2 slides time. You'll either find it hilarious or you'll be traumatized for life. Either or. If you're traumatized, just don't bother telling us. Yes, so 2 weeks to go. We're 14 days. We're in the final countdown for the Irish Whiskey Experiences website launch. If you haven't already signed up, please do on the link you can see there, the website there. So 14 days away from the website launch and going live with our inaugural Whiskey Experiences. So Barry will back me up on this. There's a lot of phone calls that have been happening this week. There's a lot of phone calls to happen in the next few days. We're pulling the final pieces together for a list of our experiences, which are, I'm so excited about them. Some of them are just, they've never been done before. It's so interesting. We're talking about Whiskey Bus 3, which I know some of you are dying to hear about. So yeah, we're down to the final grind now. 2 weeks to go.
That's right. And for those people who haven't returned Lauren's phone calls, please return Lauren's phone calls. She's trying to bring you business.
I'm trying to provide you with a great experience. If you don't make me harass you via email any more than I already have. I don't think the 2 people we're referring to are on tonight, so they're purposely avoiding the Shebeen to avoid me. So yeah, no, we honestly can't wait. It's been there's a lot of planning, there's a lot of moving parts and moving pieces behind the scenes, but we're ready to go. Tony's just asked a great question there. Are we taking bets on how soon we crash the website? I mean, I think we'd be happy if the website crashed maybe for about 10 minutes, as long as we can fix it quickly.
Lauren, for those people who who maybe are joining for the first time are not aware of what we're talking about here, would you give a little introductory overview of what Irish Whiskey Experiences is? Because the two of us are part of it. We're 2/3 of the business.
Absolutely. So Irish Whiskey Experiences, our aim really, and what we aspire to do is to take those who are willing and those who want to learn a little bit more about the liquids that's in your glass, those who want to go deeper into the stories, the places, the people behind the brands, and those that influence the brands. So I think our belief is you can very easily walk off the street in Dublin, for example, go into a distillery and have a tour. That's very easy to do. But what we want to do is elevate that experience around Irish whiskey and bring it to a new level, and a new level of fun, but also a new level of education and access to those people that make the brands what they are. I very much believed, and I still believe, that the number one thing that made me fall in love with this industry, and I know Barry's the same and Anthony would agree as well, is the history and the stories and the people. And we want to tie all of those things together, the three things together, and create really unique experiences, once in a lifetime experiences that you will never ever forget. And those moments that you're standing on the Giant's Causeway with a whiskey in hand, or you're standing in a barley field in Clonakilty with one of the founders, and you just think, is this actually happening to me? That is what we aspire to do. That's Irish Whiskey Experiences.
I agree.
You're so chilled now. You're sitting there with a little whiskey. But
the crack that we had on last year's Whiskey Bus, which was this mad idea that started on one of these very live streams, as many of you know, the crack that we had with 30 guests, 30 attendees, 30 mad whiskey fans who jumped at the chance and took us up on this mad offer to come with us for 7 days throughout Ireland, 9 distilleries, 16 pubs, what was it, 52 shots of whiskey.
63.
53. The amazing, I think it opened our eyes to see what Irish whiskey was through everyone else's eyes, and showed us, okay, there's so much more to whiskey than the liquid in the glass. It is everything Lauren said around it. And the more we find reasons, opportunities, ways to engage in those things, the better the whiskey will taste. And that's really it. And that's what we're doing. So building on that to launch into these next things that Lauren's going to share a few details of now as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, I feel like the people and the stories behind the brands, and those people who have passed their story on to the next generation and so on and so forth, that's how the industry survived. Like that's why we're seeing this industry growing. It's people instilling passion into others, whether it be future master coopers, future master blenders, distillers, or just whiskey enthusiasts and evangelists. It doesn't matter. We're all tied by that same passion, and that's to love whiskey and support the people behind it. We're having there's a few, I see Mike reminiscing on the inaugural Whiskey Bus 1. What a week that was. I was only there for 2 days of it, and it still exhausted me. Preparing myself for August.
There's a few there. Look, David, one of his greatest experiences. Cheryl, there'll never be another first. No, there won't. No. Unless we turn everything on its head and call this new one Whiskey Bus number 1 as well. And then we'll see how many people are on Whiskey Bus number 1.
We confuse. Technically, this is Whiskey Bus number 1 of Irish Whiskey Experiences, but I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to go there. Don't worry. No. I won't take away those who were on the first one.
No. Do you have command control of the slides, or do I?
I do indeed. So, drum roll. One of our experiences that you can avail of come the 30th of July is. Now, you've heard of Lauren on the Lee, you've heard of whiskey on the water, you've heard of various expressions. Now we have Barry on a boat.
Captaining, driving it, sailing it, docking it, pouring the whiskey.
You need a little captain's hat now to match your anchored shirt.
Little Stories and Sips badge in the front of it.
Yes, I'll add that to the to-do list for tomorrow. So, Barry on a boat, you have the opportunity to it's a chartered whiskey cruise. So you can hire a cruise, which is 2.5 hours from Cork around to Cove, which is Barry's hometown, as we know, and back again. So you can take in the beautiful Cork skyline. You can take in St. Colman's Cathedral, the colourful houses of Cove, Spike Island, and so on and so forth, all from the comfort of a boat with a whiskey in your hand. And you can cater it to yourself. You can bring however many people you want, your partner, your friends, your colleagues, whoever it may be. And you can either choose the whiskies which you would like to taste, or you can have Barry surprise you. Isn't that right?
Yes. The plan is that we'll build a whiskey experience around you, and I'll host it. I'll take you down around Cork Harbour. I will go nowhere near the steering wheel of the ship. Instead, I'll be in the back with the rest of you, up to 20 people, and we'll get a great afternoon or evening catered by the English market, the famous gourmet English market in Cork. They'll cater it. We'll bring whiskies, whether you want Method Madness 28-year-old, or whether you want a silent distillery, whether you want Jameson Black Barrel or a bottle of Paddy and drink it out of a sock or a shoe. It doesn't matter to me, as long as we have the crack. And what we want to do is just provide a unique whiskey time, unique whiskey experience centered around a city that is home to some of the most famous whiskies in the world. And I'm very proud of Cork. I'm very proud of Cove. I'm very proud of Irish whiskies and Cork whiskies. So we've teamed up with Cork Harbour Cruises to offer this either through us. They'll eventually, I think, try and offer it as well, with me on board. So I thought if I'm in Cork and you're in Cork and you want to go on a boat, let's have some fun. Let's privately charter the boat, and let's take you and your friends, your family, your company, whoever you want, or strangers you see on the streets of Cork. Point at them, and we'll invite them.
Strangers who look like they're down for a good time and drinking whiskey on a boat, you can bring them along. Basically, what Barry is saying, reading between the lines, everyone, those whiskies you see on the back shelf there, free reign, free game.
Everything's negotiable. Everything's negotiable.
So basically, you can come into Barry's house and select the no.
This is not part of it. This is not part of it. But the good news is that the boat has an alcohol license, and we're fully legally compliant in being able to offer. It doesn't have a bond now, mind you, but it does have a license.
there's a new avenue for us to explore. If we can somehow get a barrel on the boat.
Now, Tony says this is going to be whiskey boat number 1. However, it's not. It's going to be whiskey boat number 2, isn't it, Lauren?
Because
whiskey boat number 1.
I can't even take this seriously, honestly. Barry said this to me earlier, and I nearly spat my cup of tea out. So this is Lauren on the Lee. Previously, Bushmills on a boat. We had to rebrand slightly, but that's absolutely fine.
Cork River. The river that runs through Cork is the River Lee, hence Lauren on the Lee. It runs into Cork Harbour.
I said to Barry, if you can put a bottle of Blackbush on that boat, you can put my head on it, and so we have it. So in August, how many weeks away are we now? I think 5, just under 5.
5 weeks away. Yeah,
5 weeks today, or tomorrow, yesterday, whenever it is. We've lost track of time already. We will be embarking on Whiskey Bus number 2, which will see us begin in Dublin, have a little stop off in Waterford, and then head on the road to Cork, which will be amazing. I honestly am, to be honest, counting down the days till we go on that. So as part of that, on Wednesday, the 23rd of August, I will be hosting a whiskey tasting on the Cork River Cruise, as I said earlier, for 2.5 hours to Cove and back again. So we'll be having the crack. Who knows, we might start a wee sing-along, Barry. I know you're fond of that after a few whiskies. We'll be having...
We're actually bringing some guests we haven't told you about, Lauren, who will be providing some music, and they will be revealed soon.
Yes, we will indeed. So there'll maybe be some very, very popular characters from the whiskey industry coming on board as well. As Barry said earlier, it'll be catered by a company which operates in the English market in Cork, Root Kitchen they're called. They'll provide beautiful platters for us on board, and we're just going to have the crack. Whiskies TBC, I'm going to pick them. And obviously they'll all be relevant. You're shaking your head. They'll all be relevant to Cork, let's say. We'll leave it at that. for the
It's
day.
going to be great. I can't wait. I've done this Cork Harbour cruise is fantastic. It's we're going to go out in the evening. It'll be, I think, about 6 o'clock. We'll go out, lovely evening cruise down the river, leaving. You literally see this boat from your bedroom window in the Metropole Hotel. It's on the other side of the river. We'll walk across the bridge. You'll see the boat right there. And we'll take that down the River Lee, past Blackrock Castle, past Little Island, down into Cork Harbour, passing, I'll point out the house I grew up in, on the corner of Rushbrook and White Point. We'll sail into Cork Harbour, past Cove, out around Spike Island, which was one of the largest prison systems ever built in the British Isles. Now a big tourist attraction. We think of it as the Alcatraz of Cork Harbour. And we'll sail around, weather permitting, we'll go all the way out to that mouth of the harbour, Cork Harbour, the second biggest natural harbour in the world after Sydney Harbour. We'll go out to where the Titanic dropped anchor at the mouth of the harbour before it set sail on its fateful voyage. And we'll, weather permitting, it can get quite choppy out there, but if weather permitting, we'll get out as far as Roach's Point and see the lighthouse there, which guards the mouth of the harbour. So it should be a good time with that. And then Lauren will be pouring drinks all the way, not all the way because we'll be going home in body bags, but she'll be pouring the drinks maybe at 3 intervals during that 2.5 hours.
We also have to respect the fact that there is also a guide on board with us who will be trying to tell us some history about Cove and Cork and its maritime past. So we'll have to respect them as well.
That's right. That's
in
right.
between the pours.
What else have we got coming up?
We also have that now, Barry, we kind of teased this one earlier. I saw you posted it in the group and it got a very excited reaction, is a JJ Sheehy's whiskey pub experience. So if you thought to yourself, if you ever walked into a bar and you thought, God, it's awful busy in here, I could really do with a little bit less noise or less people, we've come up with a solution for you, and that's to hire your own pub for the night. So you can have JJ Sheehy's pub. Of course, our co-founder Anthony Sheehy and his wife Katie will greet you with open arms at the door of his pub, also his house, as we know. And you can take over the pub for the night. You can be on your own if you really desire. Again, partner, friends, family. If you want to bring work colleagues, it's entirely up to you. Again, this is an experience which can be entirely catered and curated towards your needs. So say if you had a brand in mind that you maybe hadn't explored before, you could request that, whoever it may be. If you are kind of after some whiskey cocktails, we can see if we can bring in a mixologist, a bartender for the night, shake you up some Irish whiskey cocktails. And if there are specific whiskies, so certain whiskies from any brands that either you love and you want to have on tap or you haven't tried before, we can also cater for that as well. Included in this experience also will be private luxury transport to and from a hotel in Dundalk as well, so you don't need to worry about driving. So you can have as many whiskies and you can try and pour. I'm sure Anthony would let you behind the bar to pour a Guinness if you ask nicely.
I don't think there's a person in Ireland with access to more whiskey than Anthony. Obviously running Irish whiskey auctions, he gets a lot of whiskey across his desk. He often bids on the whiskey and for bottles he likes himself, and is in there no different than yourselves, trying to get bottles that he particularly loves. And if there's any whiskey that you like, he can put it on the shelf. I think this is a great idea for a couple of reasons. One is if you take over the bar, you're going to have Anthony and Katie in there, who are just the most welcoming couple you've ever met in your life, who will take care of you. Like you said, they'll let you come in behind the bar, pour your own pints of Guinness. If we want to get maybe a trad musician band in there, we can bring in trad music into the corner, take over the bar for the night, and just have a great time. Your very own Shebeen or your very own lock-in there in Dundalk with some of the best whiskey in the world. And we'll throw in a bar tab in there as well as part of it. Like, there's just so much we can do here. And I just think it was a no-brainer when we said to Anthony, like, we got to take over your pub. We have to do it.
Have to do it. And we also said as well, now this is obviously very much subject to availability, but if there was a brand ambassador who happened to be in the area or nearby who could come in, say hello, mix up a drink for you, we can also explore that option as well. So the possibilities are endless. I think it's great crack. It's unbelievable. And it's such a quaint, traditional little pub. And I think we can both testify that the Guinness is honestly one of the best in Ireland. It's so
Depends who pours it.
I knew
depends who
this was
poured them.
coming. There was absolutely nothing wrong with my pints of Guinness. You still drank them.
I had no choice. I was sandwiched in there. I had nowhere to move. I couldn't get out of my seat. It was drink it or die of thirst. Bob wants to know if we can visit the High B while in Cork. The High B is a famous pub. High B is a short abbreviation for Hibernian Hotel, which used to be a hotel. It's in the heart of Cork on Oliver Plunkett Street. Famous bar. Infamously, you're not allowed to use your phone in there. You're not allowed to take pictures. It's like an old man's living room because it used to be for many, many years. Bob, you can visit it, certainly. We won't get 40 people in there, but you can go there on your own or with a couple of people on one of our downtimes while we're in Cork, and we'll give you all the directions to get there. In fact, I recommend you go there. But like much of our whiskey bus experiences, for the smallest bars in Ireland, we can't rock up with 40 people because as much as the Irish love a good tourist, they don't love 40 of them all at the one time, and it can interrupt their own pipe drinking. But yes, we'll visit the High B.
Bob, I also have, when we have free time in Cork, in the evening, actually, after the harbour cruise, we have a free evening. I will have a city guide with a few pubs on it that I suggest you go to, and the High B is certainly on there. So you've got the High B, you've got the Oval, best pint of Beamish in Cork, unbelievable, and obviously you have the Shelburne, which is one of the best whiskey bars in Ireland. So all of them are on there. Don't worry, I'll keep you right. Follow me.
As to the question, what time does Sheehy's close? I think the answer is we don't understand the question, so we'll leave that.
I think, or what was it, like 4:30 in the morning? I think was the last time.
No. Listen, the police will be listening. The bar closed at its legally mandated time. We just moved into Anthony's house, which is not licensed.
I was going to say we were in Anthony's living room. It's all fine. It's drinking in the comfort of his own home.
That was close. We're almost. We're not past the statute of limitations yet. Lloyd says he didn't know the Titanic was from Cork. It wasn't. It was up from closer to Lauren. It was built in Belfast, in the shipyards in Belfast, in the docks in Belfast city centre in 1911 and 12. And it set sail from Belfast. It then went to Southampton, Cherbourg, and then Queenstown at the time, which is now Cove. And Cove was the last port of call. And as we always say in Cove, she was fine when she left Cove. So whatever happened after that, it wasn't Cove's fault. It wasn't our fault.
The famous phrase is built by Irishmen, sunk by Englishmen. Is that not the phrase?
Well, now we're going to get into the politics of who works in Harland and Wolff back in the day. Was it Irishmen or Englishmen or what was it?
We're not even going to go there. That's a whole different shebeen.
We will have more experiences that involve the Titanic. In fact, this whiskey bus coming up, Whiskey Bus 2, when we go to Cove on Tuesday, the day before our cruise. So we go there on Tuesday in the afternoon. You'll have 3 or 4 hours to yourself. One of the experiences is the Titanic experience, which I recommend visiting. 2 great experiences in Cove. One is the Heritage Centre, which traces the roots of emigration out of Ireland from 1600s to the present day. And the other is the Titanic experience, where when you go in there, you're given the you're given a passenger card of one of the passengers on the Titanic. And as you go through the experience, you're kind of following their route and their journey. And at the end of it, you get to find out, well, did you sink or swim? And just one or the other. And you get to see where that person came from and whether they had a sad demise or whether they made it back home. Great experience. Great experience.
Yeah.
What other experiences are we going to talk about tonight?
So we're also going to talk about one which is part of our esteemed whiskey bus. So Whiskey Bus 3 is we're thick and fast planning it. We're in the depths of planning it. We're nearly finished actually before the 30th. So part of our Whiskey Bus 3, we're going to the Wild West. So we're going to one of the most popular and famous tourist destinations in Ireland, which is the Wild Atlantic Way. So we will begin our week in Limerick and we will finish in Westport. So from the 15th to the 22nd of March next year will be Whiskey Bus number 3. So one of those experiences is Toman Gate in Limerick. Nick Ryan, the founder, which Barry, I believe you've done a Meet the Maker with as well. He is kind of championing Toman Gate, a very old old brand within Irish whiskey history, and he's really bringing back distilling to Limerick, but also he's really championing the kind of incredible, really interesting distilling past of Limerick as well. And he's really paving the way for the comeback of the brand. So we'll be spending a full day in Limerick with Nick, and I was chatting to him last Tuesday just past. He's got a great experience in store for us. I'm not going to give away too many secrets just yet, but it'll be a fantastic day. Fantastic day.
We're going to base ourselves in the West. We're going to recommend people fly into Shannon Airport. We've already done the research. There's lots of flights possible out of the East Coast of the US. So if you've got a connecting flight, whether you're coming from Texas or California or the Midwest, you can connect through a number of airports in the East Coast to get to Shannon Airport on Ireland's West Coast, or you can get a bus from Dublin, which is only 2 hours across the country. But we'll be doing all of our experiences on the West Coast. We won't be hitting Dublin at all this time. We've given Dublin enough of our hard-earned euros and dollars. It's time to spread it out around the country. And we're going to go west. And like Lauren said, really great experiences being planned. We'll share more of them on July 30th when we launch and share with you all the details of Whiskey Bus 3. We won't take reservations that night, just to answer the question, preempt that. We'll wait till the next day, the 31st of July, the Monday in the afternoon, so that we can be up and ready and technologically tuned in and having our IT team on standby if anything happens. But we'll do the reveal on Sunday night, and we'll open up reservations on Monday, first come, first served. But we'll have 39 places available on the bus, starting in Shannon, 3 nights in Limerick. I'm not going to tell you the rest. We'll tell you on July 30th, but just let you know that. Actually, I'm going to tease one thing. I hear Lauren, you're going to give another thing away. We talked about on a few Shebeens, it's probably not a secret. We said, wouldn't it be great if the Whiskey Bus could get involved in the St. Patrick's Day parade? I'm not going to say any more except to tell you that we will be in the St. Patrick's Day parade.
I'm sitting here like, don't ruin it before the 30th.
We've got 30 other experiences we have to get through on the 30th. How are we going to?
That's very true. That's very true. Can everyone just brace themselves for the 30th of July, because it could be going back to the lock-in days where it lasted about 3 hours. We could be hitting there.
The numbers will be dwindling. The numbers just going down and down and down as we keep talking. Like 3 people left at the end of it.
We're sideways, sitting leaning up with 50 whiskies in. But no, just to on your point there, David, I've just said you've never been through Shannon. I had a look during the week just to make sure that it was a logistical pathway into Ireland for most people in the areas of most people where you guys are. So you can fly direct to Shannon from New York, which is no surprise, and Boston. So they are the two airports, JFK, of course, and Boston. You can fly direct to Shannon. For the likes of Columbus, Ohio, Las Vegas, there's one stop, and the stop is either typically JFK itself or London Heathrow, and then over to Shannon. Yeah. They are actually very reasonably priced. When I look for the dates that you would be flying in if you were obviously to take part in the Whiskey Bus, it's pretty reasonable. Like for example, I have them sitting in front of me here. Boston direct is $742 return. New York is $746 return.
We've done we basically took, just to stress test this, we took all the addresses of everyone on our current Whiskey Bus. We put them through the system because you represent a good range of destinations across the United States. And we tried to figure out, from a time perspective and a cost perspective, is Shannon feasible? And we were surprised how feasible it is. Now, if for whatever reason your particular airport at your particular time just doesn't work, Heathrow is one of the greatest hubs for distributing people back to Ireland. So LA to Heathrow, there are direct flights. I know it's a long flight, but there is LA to Heathrow. There's also, of course, New York, etc. to Heathrow. And then Shannon is an hour and 10 minutes from Heathrow. The alternative is you fly into Dublin Airport. There is a bus outside the arrivals, an air coach that'll take you to Shannon. Dublin to Shannon. Like you can go straight 2 hours on the motorway and you're in Shannon. And that'll cost you, I think, €16, I think.
Where there's a will, there's a way. Cheryl's just asked a great question about the weather in Ireland in March.
Terrible.
No, well, you say that,
No.
but it's actually so hit and miss. This is the thing about, like, for example, the first week of March this year, the weather has been better than this week in Ireland in July. It has not. Well, I don't know about you, Barry, down in Cork, but for me, up in the north coast, the County Antrim coast, it has not stopped raining. Whereas in March, at the time with my Bushmills guys, my colleagues there, we did a hike from Dunseverick Castle up in the north coast around to the Giant's Causeway, and we were in t-shirts. Like it's so hard to tell.
It is.
It's impossible to know. So it could be quite mild. It might be raining sideways. We just won't know, unfortunately.
So we have no, obviously I don't need to tell you we have no control of the weather, but what I mean to say is we are restricted in terms of how many times of the year we're likely to have no rain. And that's normally going to be August, right? Like August, September it's going to have rain. That's like the last whiskey bus. I don't know how you did it, but there wasn't a drop of rain for 7 days. I left that whiskey bus with a suntan and I don't know how I did it. And I was inside all the time. But what you're going to do, like what you're going to see in March in Ireland, especially on the West Coast, if you look at the map of Ireland, you'll see the West Coast is all fragmented coastline, rocks, and you know what gives it that rugged coastline? Wind and rain. There's no way around it. March, like the springtime, wintertime, it does get hammered by rain. Now, saying that, there's very few of our plans are around being outside. Very few. There is one, which is the same. We will have suitable attire to cover you in, and we are recommending that you bring a rain coat and shoes that are comfortable for outside when it does get wet. But that's just the nature of Ireland. Like, we're going to do as much as we can inside, and we love a good wet day because it means we have to spend longer on a high stool inside the pub, and we'd be encouraging you all to do the same.
Absolutely. I think the number one piece of advice I always give to people coming to Ireland is just layers. Honestly, just layers. If it's warm, you can take them off. If it's cold, you can add them back on again. It's the safest option. A light raincoat probably in March would suffice, with kind of a vest top or a sweater or whatever underneath. You'd be fine.
Lauren, we might have to add to the list to buy a few golf umbrellas.
A few golf umbrellas. Very good point. Yes.
Whiskey bus golf umbrellas.
The merch requirements never ends.
They don't. Instead of t-shirts, we might have to get ponchos. But
yes.
Brandon, we have like there are a few outdoor. I mean, there's probably one more outdoor experience that we're planning for Whiskey Bus 3 than just the parade. We'll talk about that on the 30th, but that is kind of weather permitting. But mostly, we'll be looking at doing great things inside in great places. So that's the plan.
Exactly. Inside.
What have we missed? I think we've hit all of the highlights of what we wanted to share for Whiskey Bus 3 and our upcoming experiences, right? We're kind of teasing them out.
We are, yeah. I feel like next Sunday could be the release of all the rest of them before the 30th. Baptism of fire.
I'm conscious that there's some folks tuned in for whom an Irish whiskey experience with us is of no interest, and I apologize, and I hope you'll indulge us as we kind of just try and maybe provide a range or a breadth of experiences from a Shebeen on a Sunday night to tasting through stories and sips to trips through Irish whiskey experiences like that. We want to make sure we're covering as many people's interests around Irish whiskey as is possible, and we'll continue to keep that very, very top of mind, that not everything we're all involved in will be for everybody. But our goal is to introduce more people to Irish whiskey, plain and simple. And we're doing that in a number of different vehicles and ways, vehicles, forgive the pun. And we want we think there's ways that the Scotch whiskey industry, the bourbon industry, Kentucky have maybe had a head start on Ireland, and we're a little bit embarrassed that Ireland isn't at that level yet, and we're kind of doing our bit to catch up, and we hope others will follow in that. We're following others will follow us in that sense, and just that there's more ways to get into Irish whiskey. Nothing will ever beat, whether it's in Ireland, whether it's here online, whether it's in New York or Columbus, Ohio, or somewhere else, us connecting together over a drink, clinking glasses, and just saying sláinte. That's what it's all about to us. And so more opportunities to do that virtually and in person, I think, are what we're trying to do all the time.
100%. Absolutely.
We've done it all. We've hit the highs, we've hit the lows, we've talked about bonds, we've talked about boats, we've drank buckets of whiskey. What are you sipping on now? Are you still on the Palo Cortado?
I'm still on the Palo Cortado, yeah. This is my last drop of it, actually.
I'm on the Dunvilles 19 single malt.
Mine's behind me there.
Oh, sure.
Could very well get a wee crack open before the night's out.
There's no good in the till. There's no good in the bottle.
Very true.
I'd love to know from everybody here as well if there are any experiences that you've done that have been particularly exciting, good, fun, memorable in other whiskey jurisdictions, or are there things in the world of Irish whiskey that you'd like to see available to you when you come over to Ireland yourself and you want a day to do something or a half day? Are there things that would appeal to you? We're going to build this around what your feedback is. We've a half dozen to a dozen things we launch with that we know will be of interest, but then beyond that, we'd love some suggestions.
I think I said this with the Shebeen we did in Anthony's and JJ Sheehy's a number of weeks ago now, that if anyone has any hobbies that we can somehow work a whiskey experience around, that's also...
If you like a bit of needlework, would you like to do needlework in a distillery in Ireland? We can arrange it.
a bit of clay pot making with a whiskey, that wouldn't go down too well, would it?
Would you like to throw a jug? Would you like to throw a jug in a bonded warehouse in West Cork?
Bowling alley, glass of whiskey, done, easy. But I mean, kind of experiences that, well, depending what they are, obviously, depending what your hobbies are, anything that
what an odd request. Like, if you have any hobbies,
like golf is a very obvious one. There is another brand as well, which supports trail running, like mountain trail running in the US, because it's deemed as a mountain whiskey. So there's always an angle. That's my point.
Are you bored of organizing your stamps in your kitchen? Would you like to do that in the comfort of a bonded warehouse in Ireland in March? If so, pack up your stamps and your tweezers now. Because we have an experience for you?
All those postcards you collect in Europe, come and collect another one in Ireland and we'll throw in a whiskey.
Fan of beer mats? May I introduce you to Whiskey Bus 7, the beer mat tour.
You collect pins, you can also collect whiskey. Come to us. Oh, stop.
We're not that out of ideas yet that we have to figure out.
No, we're not. Of course we're not. We haven't even scratched the surface. But I just think it would be interesting to appeal to a wider audience. See,
that's a good suggestion from Stacey. Ireland filming locations.
Yeah, the Game of Thrones stuff is absolutely mad. Like, when that whole franchise, the series, kind of really took off in Ireland, obviously they filmed in so many locations across Ireland. There were literal tour companies being formed off the back of that. Like, there are Game of Thrones tours that exclusively take you to locations that it was filmed. It's just mad how, like, a thing, a series or whatever it may be, can create a whole separate industry.
I know. It's we'll definitely factor that in. Like, we've had some great requests and suggestions from people coming in already around hobbies that more golf related than philately. But in any case, there's been some good suggestions on tying it in with existing trips. So yeah, we'll definitely bear that in mind. famous rural pubs. Do you know, Tyrone, there's definitely a market for that. The challenge on a larger group is you just can't get more than 4 or 5 people in a group into a pub. In fact, a lot of rural pubs that aren't catering or aren't designed for tourists would be a bit kind of raising their eyebrow at a group coming in. They'd be a bit nervous about it. So I think we will definitely factor that in for the smaller 4 to 6 person trips. So like one of our options, like there's no harm in us mentioning this, but like if you don't want to do a 7-day whiskey bus tour of Ireland, but you do want to do 3 days in the north or 3 days in the west or 3 days in the east or the south or the Midlands, wherever that is, Lauren or myself or Anthony or one of our team that will grow over time, hopefully, will be able to take you on one of those where we'll build an itinerary for you. So if you came to us and said, I want to know Ireland as the Irish love it. I want to live like a local for 3 days. I want to drink the way you drink, eat the way you eat. I want to be Irish for 3 days. Tyrone, we can build you the time of your life. Now, we can't do that for 40 people at a time because Irish people don't tend to travel in packs of 40 at a time. We tend to travel in smaller packs, but we can do it for smaller groups, and then we can do different experiences for the larger groups, but definitely we can do it.
In my previous career, my previous endeavor, one of the things I really wanted to do, Tyrone, on your point, 2 things actually. One was a trad trail and tie in whiskey experiences. So have like a little kind of a traditional Irish music, maybe a poet, a storyteller, whoever comes in, and you build an experience around that pub and a certain brand that's maybe in proximity to said pub. And then the other one was, on your point, kind of the really old rural whiskey pubs of Ireland, do a tour of them. I know some of them are very far away from each other, but within reason to include them in kind of like a few days trip. So yeah, we'll definitely factor that for sure.
No harm to mention even more of what we're going to mention on July 30th. As co-founder,
whiskey's going in and the experiences are coming out. These guys are sitting here like, make them drink more whiskey. Let's go.
Look, I as co-founder, I get to decide what I will share or not. I wield some power in the world of Irish whiskey experiences. We have had a good few requests already from folks really excited about what we're doing, who have already requested some help in planning some experiences even before we've launched anything. And so we know that outside of the curated experiences that we launch with, there'll be folks, some of you may be included, that say, I have 2 days, I'd like your help. I don't need your experiences necessarily, but I would like direction. I want to know which pubs to go to. I want to know which distilleries to hit. Should I choose this tour in the distillery versus that tour? So we want to be able to help on that side, even if we're not booking experiences. But as you can imagine, there is a resource limit as to how much we can do through the likes of Facebook Messenger, and kind of individually answering like, hey, because I get a lot of messages which are, Barry, I'm coming to Ireland for 3 weeks. Can you help? Can you give me an itinerary? And as much as I'd love to, there just isn't all the time in the day to be able to give individual itineraries to people just over Messenger or social media, etc. So what we've put our heads together on and thought is, okay, well, how do you do everything from you give as much advice you possibly can to planning things, etc. And I think where we've landed is our Facebook community right now is where we have 10,000 people, where there's a lot of great information and a lot of great helpful people. And I think if somebody wants a 1 week itinerary and they don't need our help in it, go into the group and say, I want suggestions for 1 week. Here's my budget, my time, my driving ability, my age, whatever it is. And I know you're going to get 100 answers. I think the next level up is you don't necessarily want a 7-day whiskey bus. Maybe you don't even want a 2-day excursion with us, but you want our advice because we know the people and we know the places. That's where we can help through Irish Whiskey Experiences, where we'll have a service that we can dedicate time to you. So it could just be a planning service. And it can be as simple as, look, we'll set aside a block of time let's say it's a block of 5 hours or 3 hours, whatever it might be, and you can use that time for us to help you. Maybe that's a phone call, maybe it's a Zoom, maybe it's over email. But I think that could be helpful where we're on the ground and we can help you. And so we'll give you a number, an email address, whatever, and we'll help you plan it out. And it doesn't have to even be our experiences. So we might say, you want to go to Belfast? No problem. You have to go to Madden's for a pint of Guinness, go in the left door, out the right door. You want to go over here, you do this. And that way you can write down all the things you got to do, and it won't cost you a penny after that, right? Like we'll have a service, you'll book a few hours of our time and we'll help you plan it out. So that's, I think, somewhere, like we're trying to figure out how do you take care of as many people as possible, but we also have just resource constraints as you can imagine.
Absolutely. And as you said, Barry, those 4 or 5 hours, however many hours you want us for, you don't even have to speak to us if you don't want to. You can send a list of requests our way, a few bullet points, where you are, what dates, and we can work around that. Or we can spend 5 hours in a Zoom call with you, and you take notes and you make your own itinerary. It can take, as you said, any form at all. But yeah, we'd love to help everyone at once and at all times. But we'd never be off our phones.
No, and we want to try and, again, if our goal is to introduce as many people to Irish whiskey as possible, our filter has to be to develop the systems and processes that allow us to help as many people as is humanly possible within reason. And so if there's enough demand for a certain service, we can also grow our team and expand the team, hopefully, to meet the demand as well. Some suggestions around a Father Ted experience on Craggy Island, the Inishmore Ted Fest. Tom, I was part of the first ever Ted Fest on Craggy Island on Inishmore, and I remember it well. I was dressed as Father Bishop Brennan, and I'd love to go and repeat that and do nothing but quote Father Ted and drink whiskey for a weekend, which would be amazing.
I adore Father Ted. I think I've seen every single episode about 15, 16 times, if not more. I'm all in for that.
Trip, Father Ted whiskey trip to Ireland.
Can you imagine?
Go to the house.
Imagine sipping whiskey in that living room. Some poor creator's living room, and we're invading it with 40 people drinking whiskey.
You have to get past the barbed wire at the gate.
Here, it's in Clare, is it not? That house is in Clare.
The house is in Clare, yeah. I visited the house. Obviously, people live there, and most of it, it's only the outdoor scenes were filmed there. Like the inside was all filmed in the studio, but a poor family live there, and every time they look out the window, they're seeing fellas dressed as priests sitting on their wall,
people outside their window with their phones up taking photos. Can you imagine? You'd be tormented. Someone's mentioning the tea man. I'm seeing comments. Scott's mentioned the tea man.
Okay, so going back maybe 2 to 3 years ago on one of our lock-ins in the middle of COVID, if I remember correct, I'm trying to remember which brand we were doing something with. Was it Dublin Liberties Distillery, maybe? Or Glendalough? In any case, they suggested a storyteller to come on as part of our lock-in. And we said, grand, bring on the storyteller, right? So this lad, anyway, it was this kind of a setup, right? Imagine you're the storyteller. I see him appearing in the little green room we have in our software here. And the screen is just black, and I just see I can barely make out his face, And I put him on the screen anyway, and it's just the slightest little outline of his face, and he's sitting in a dark room, and he's basically saying he's in a house where the power's gone out, not unlike Jarlath the other night. But this guy was in some kind of medieval banqueting hall or something, and he had candles going on, and he said anyway the show must go on, and he started telling us a story about a lake in County Wicklow that is known as, I don't know. This story went on for about an hour and a half, and near the end, as it was getting to the crescendo and maybe the payoff of the whole story, suddenly there were new characters that I'd imagine should have been in the story earlier on, but they weren't. And suddenly they were introduced. Anyway, this man was the tea man. He brought tea to people around the country. There was a horse. There was a very important baby that appeared very late in the story. Should have been there from day one. It wasn't. People thought this was the greatest story they've ever heard in their life because it was a train wreck. It was an absolute train wreck of a story. And people have wanted him back ever since for more train wrecks.
I definitely missed that one, so I'm going to have to go back and rewatch that at
I
some
gotta
point
find
during
that.
the
I
week.
need to find that. This guy was, I mean, he was a character. I think I went through about 5 whiskeys as he was telling the story, and I saw no end in sight. No end in sight.
He's like an old Irish man and sitting at the bar still, and he's just droning on after 12 pints, and there's no end to his story.
He was like the uncle in Derry Girls, and he just went on and on.
Stop with the younger. And another thing.
I don't know now if you've ever seen the wind or felt the wind, and you'd find a good strong wind out there.
And I'll tell you another thing. It was a hard boiled sweet. Maybe it wasn't a hard boiled sweet. We're talking about T-Men and everyone going on about stories. We're going to have all of our experiences online by the end of tonight, Barry, if we keep going.
I think we will wind down activities now and quit while we're ahead, lest we give away anything else. But look, I'm excited about what's coming on all aspects from more Shebeens together. And I think you should all give Lauren a round of applause. She's doing a great job as co-host. There'll be a week yet where she does it all on her own. She just doesn't know it yet. But it's coming. It's coming. And
let me check my contract here. Hold on.
This is extracurricular activities. Profile building. You're doing a great old job, and we will be back next week with more tidbits to share. And we have to come up with a topic for next week.
We do, because 30th is going to be the 3 of us again, hopefully in person or not in person.
I'm thinking not in person. I'm leaning. Unfortunately, I have a busy day the 30th, so I think it'll be a not in person 30th of July.
Yeah. So we'll be full steam ahead talking about all things experiences on the 30th. So we have to find a way to lead next week's Shebeen beautifully into the 30th.
If you want to stay up to date on our Irish whiskey experiences, we will be sending out emails to you. Go and sign up on irishwhiskeyexperiences.com. If you would like to be part of our Stories and Sips Whiskey Club and get access to great whiskey samples, a blind tasting coming soon, and another whiskey being announced on Friday, then all you have to do is go to storiesandsIps.com/club. And what else? We've said a lot, too much maybe, but we've had a good night. We've kept everybody entertained. The resurgence and growth of Irish whiskey, says Scott, would be a good topic. That would be a good topic. That could be covered. That could be done.
Could be done. That'll be a long night.
You could do Dingle from 2012 to today. Like, start with Dingle, end with, what was the most recent distillery?
You could.
Yeah.
You could.
We'll think about it. We won't ignore it.
We'll put that in the vault. We'll see what we can do.
Johnny's obsessed with the tea, man. Anyway, we might have to. We'll bring a cup of tea.
I'm gonna find. Well, do you know what we'll do for next week's Shebeen? Alongside the whiskey, we'll enjoy a cup of tea ourselves. Is what we'll do.
How about no?
I will.
I'll have another whiskey to go with the whiskey. I'll drink whiskey out of a teacup if it's helpful.
Whiskey. Oh, okay.
Folks, you've been great. You're a great audience, great crack. Love the questions, and look forward to chatting with you in our community over the next few days. Irish Whiskey Fans of America Facebook group, and on Friday on Stories and Sips social media channels and via email, we'll share a little tease of not even a tease, maybe a reveal of our next whiskey, our next club whiskey, which I'm excited to get in front of you. We're the only people in the world that will get this whiskey. There'll be 219 bottles at last count, and just a few shy of what we had at our Dunville's bottling. And it should be enough for everyone who wants one to get one based on previous ordering ratios and percentages. But sure, look, every release is a new learning curve for me. Any case, Lauren, thank you for your company and your input and your knowledge. It's been a good night. And with that, we'll say goodbye to everyone, right?
It has indeed. Cheers, Barry. Slán, everyone. Good night.
Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Have a good all night.